Hello, I'm Steve Weber, the host of Book Cheapskate. Today we're going to expand on a book review we did just a little while ago that has gotten a lot of attention, our analysis of Art of the Deal by Donald Trump, because honestly, who doesn't enjoy or hate talking about Trump? Always a popular topic, no matter what your politics are. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and bookworm sidekick, Cassandra. Good morning, Cass.
Morning. Ready to talk Trump. It's always something.
Okay, let's dive in and dive in deep.
Right. So our mission today, it's really focused on this one book, The Art of the Deal, from back in 1987. But we're not looking at it just as, a simple autobiography or some kind of dry business manual.
Definitely not.
Instead, we're digging into sources that frame it very differently. They call it a meticulously crafted origin story, even a brazen manifesto of American aspiration.
Okay, brazen manifesto. That definitely catches the ear.
It does, right. So the goal here, for you listening, is to really unpack how this book, this text, became the foundational blueprint for Donald Trump's entire career arc. We're talking decades here.
From real estate guy to, well, everything else.
Exactly. Luxury developer, then this huge national celebrity, and eventually the U.S. presidency. Our sources argue this book is the defining document of his specific brand of power.
That distinction you made, origin story, versus just a business guide that feels absolutely critical to understanding its impact. Because, when you think about when it came out.
Oh, the timing. It wasn't just good timing. It was like the perfect storm, a perfect alignment of this particular person and the whole cultural vibe.
Yeah, talk about that context. 1987, what was going on?
Okay, so you got to picture it. 1987, America was just swimming in this greed is good ethos, think Wall Street, the movie. Aggressive corporate takeovers, deregulation happening fast, high-stakes finance.
Right, the Gordon Gekko era. Capitalism felt less like accounting and more like a blood sport.
Totally. It was presented as this spectacular contact sport. And most business books back then, they were pretty dry.
Yeah, thick academic things, written for MBAs mostly.
Exactly. But then comes this book, and it offers something completely different. It felt transparent somehow, not academic at all, and honestly, pretty entertaining. It was like a roadmap to winning in that aggressive new world.
So it wasn't just what it said, but how it said it.
Absolutely. What made it a massive bestseller, really, was the presentation. It wasn't just giving advice. The whole thing felt like a performance. And the sources we looked at really hammer this home. People weren't necessarily buying it for, solid financial planning tips.
What were they buying then?
They were buying permission to be bold, to be unapologetic, maybe even larger than life. It tapped into something.
So it became this cultural thing, validating that aggressive attitude, like, it's okay to be ruthless.
Pretty much. It sold the persona just as much as any tactic in the book, maybe even more so. It was selling Trump, the brand.
And in selling that persona, that brand, it really did solidify his identity, didn't it? It took him from being this, high-profile New York developer to someone recognized across the country, a national icon, almost overnight.
It was a huge leap. But, and this is important, to really grasp the mythology that the book builds, we kind of have to look at the man before the book. Because the narrative in The Art of the Deal, well, it tends to gloss over some key facts about how he started.
Right, the origin part of the origin story.
It's vital context.
Yes.
Okay, so Donald John Trump, son of Fred Trump. Now, Fred Trump was already a very successful, very wealthy developer, mostly in Queens, building housing, solid middle-class stuff.
Not quite the glitz of Manhattan, then.
Not at all. And this idea of the self-made man, it's so central to the Trump myth, right? But the sources are pretty clear on this. Donald Trump got a massive leg up from his father. We're talking established wealth, political connections Fred had built up in New York.
And direct to financial help, too, I said.
Oh, yeah. Sources confirm substantial financial assistance, things like early loan guarantees, big capital infusions at key moments. It wasn't starting from zero, not even close.
So his big ambition, coming out of Wharton School of Finance, it wasn't sticking with the family business in Queens.
No way. He aimed straight for Manhattan, the biggest stage, the flashiest deals right from the get-go. He wanted the spectacle.
And his early moves there, they seemed designed for maximum impact, maximum visibility.
Totally calculated. Think about the old Commodore Hotel near Grand Central, just sitting there, kind of decrepit. He transforms it into the Grand Hyatt.
That was a big deal at the time.
Huge. And the sources point out his real genius there wasn't necessarily in the construction or the design, although that was part of it. It was navigating the incredibly complex city politics to lock down these massive, unprecedented 40-year tax breaks.
Wow, 40 years.
Yeah, that deal, that was the announcement. That was him arriving on the Manhattan scene, showing he could play the game at the highest level, especially the political maneuvering part.
And then maybe the most iconic symbol of his early brand, Trump Tower. Finished in 83, right?
That's the one. Trump Tower was, well, it was pure, unadulterated 1980s luxury, instantly recognizable, that pinkish marble, the gold.
Very gold.
Very gold. It wasn't just a building. It was basically a giant billboard for the personality itself. Gilded, controversial, right there in the heart of Manhattan. A statement.
But the book, The Art of the Deal, it probably doesn't dwell too much on, say, the financial struggles that might have been happening around the same time.
That's putting it mildly. The book tends to omit or, really minimize the growing complexities, especially the stuff happening outside Manhattan. While he's dazzling everyone with Trump Tower, he's also making these huge, aggressive bets in the Atlantic City casino market.
Right, the Taj Mahal and others?
Exactly. Initially, they looked like massive, flashy successes, but the sources are clear. Those casinos quickly became sites of serious financial trouble. They eventually led to multiple corporate bankruptcies down the line.
Which isn't exactly the story you want out there when you're building a brand of infallible success.
Precisely. The myth, the image of the perpetual winner, it had to be firmly established before the full, messy financial reality became too obvious, too public.
And that brings us right back to why he might have needed a book like The Art of the Deal in 1987. It wasn't just, hey, I've got some wisdom to share.
No, it was strategic. It was market control, brand control.
Explain that.
Okay. By the mid-'80s, yeah, the New York press is obsessed with him. They're writing about him constantly. But he needed something bigger, a controlled national platform to really cement his brand. Especially because, as we said, some of those Atlantic City ventures were starting to look shaky.
So the book was a preemptive strike almost.
You could see it that way. The Art of the Deal was this incredibly calculated effort to seize control of his own narrative, to sell the entire country on this persona of the infallible genius businessman. He had to export the Trump spectacle beyond just New York City.
Okay, now this is where, as you said, it gets really interesting. When you dive into how the book was actually put together, the ghostwriter, Tony Schwartz, this part really changes how you see the final product, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This is where the story shifts from potential memoir territory straight into, well, mythology creation. Tony Schwartz, he was a respected journalist, brought in specifically to capture Trump's voice. Spent about 18 months shadowing him, listening, interviewing.
Standard procedure for ghostwriting, I guess.
On the surface, yeah. But Schwartz later came out with claims that just fundamentally altered the perception of the book. He basically said, look, pretty early on, I realized this wasn't about recording facts or history. It was about shaping a legend.
Wow. So if the goal was just to capture the authentic voice, why would Schwartz feel the need, years later, to publicly kind of distance himself, to say it wasn't really reflective of the man he observed? Doesn't that imply the whole process was, well, dishonest from the start?
It definitely raises huge questions about authenticity, doesn't it? Schwartz's later statements are pretty stark. He claimed he didn't just transcribe Trump's actual way of speaking. He found Trump's speech patterns, apparently, quite repetitive, often circling back to personal grievances, people he felt had wronged him.
Not exactly the dynamic, decisive CEO voice we hear in the book.
Not according to Schwartz. He said he consciously channeled something else. He called it a mythological version of the man. So that voice you encounter in the book, brash, super decisive, always winning, never doubting himself, Schwartz essentially claims he manufactured it. It was the idealized archetype of that aggressive 80s dealmaker.
So the famous tone, that incredibly fast pace, the constant self-praise, that was a deliberate construction, a piece of literary engineering almost.
That's what Schwartz argues. It wasn't just writing, it was, in essence, brand management disguised as prose, strategic communication.
Which means the book itself becomes a kind of blueprint, not just of his past deals, but maybe for a future reality he wanted to create.
That's a really sharp way to put it. It's filled with these anecdotes, right? Stories about renovating the Woolman Rink in Central Park, the battles over the Grand Hyatt taxes, and in every single story, the narrator, Trump, achieves this clear, decisive, usually zero-sum victory.
Right, he always comes out on top, no ambiguity.
Exactly. The whole narrative structure is basically designed as a propaganda tool. Its purpose is to build and reinforce an image of utter infallibility, an image that couldn't really be challenged by messy facts or inconvenient details.
And that template you described, the fast pace, the anecdotal style, deeply narcissistic yet charmingly accessible, that's what made it fly off the shelves.
Absolutely. It takes these incredibly complex financial deals, negotiations, tax breaks, and reframes them, makes them feel like high-stakes personal gambles. It gives the reader this feeling almost like you're a privileged insider, getting a peek behind the curtain, watching a master manipulator at work.
And it's structured around these, 11 core principles?
Yeah, 11 distinct, often very blunt principles. Like, take the Woolman Rink story, he tells. The city government had famously failed for years to renovate this public ice rink. It was an embarrassment.
I remember that. It was a big local story.
Right, so Trump swoops in, very publicly shames the city bureaucracy, takes over the project, demands the deal gets renegotiated on his terms, and gets it done way under budget and ahead of schedule.
A huge PR win for him.
Massive. And it perfectly illustrates principles like protect the downside and negotiate like hell. He showed, or claimed to show, that success came from applying brute force, from being tough, not from playing nice or following bureaucratic rules. The anecdotes are all there to prove the principles work, every single time.
What's really fascinating, though, is thinking about why it had such enduring appeal. Because, as you said, it's probably not because people were using it to manage their 401ks.
Not likely, no.
It seems rooted in something deeper, more psychological. You called it the fantasy of unchecked power.
Yeah, I think that's the core insight from a lot of the analysis. Think about it. In our everyday lives, most of us operate within a whole web of constraints, right? Legal rules, financial limits, social expectations, workplace politics.
We have bosses, we have budgets, we have HR departments.
Exactly. The art of the deal offers this vicarious thrill. It lets the reader imagine, just for a little while, what it's like to be someone who seemingly isn't bound by any of those constraints, someone who can just say the outrageous, aggressive things we might sometimes think but would never actually say in our own lives.
Right, it's like wish fulfillment, but for the boardroom or the negotiation table.
It's the ultimate power fantasy, really, all wrapped up in this slick, commercial, very accessible package. And the rules themselves are so simple, so direct. Think big, fight back, be outrageous.
It feeds into that very American, maybe very 80s belief that success is just about attitude, about having the guts, the force of will, not about boring details or complex systems.
Precisely. It confirms this idea that it's all about the individual imposing their will on the world, which leads us directly into some of the major criticisms of the book's content. If you connect that win-at-all-costs attitude to the bigger picture, well, a lot of critics, then and now, point to a fundamental lack of ethical consideration.
Yeah, you use the phrase ethical or moral vacuum. That seems strong, but maybe accurate.
It reflects the critique. The focus is relentlessly, obsessively on winning, on dominating the other party in a negotiation. Often it seems with very little regard for fairness or long-term consequences or building stable relationships or even, a broader community good.
It promotes this purely transactional mindset for everything.
That's the argument.
Right.
Winning is the only thing that matters. Partnership, civic duty, fairness. Those aren't really part of the equation in the book's worldview. And critics argue that this mindset, this idea that every single human interaction is basically a transaction and relationships are just assets you can leverage, that's inherently corrosive. It eats away at trust.
And we have to circle back again to the factual basis for all these supposed victories he describes, because the narrative is so laser-focused on proving he's infallible. You have to question the historical accuracy, right? Especially with what the ghostwriter later revealed.
Absolutely. The sources that analyze the book are deeply skeptical. Tony Schwartz's later testimony, plus subsequent investigative journalism over the years, they cast pretty serious doubt on many of the self-reported successes in the book.
How so?
Well, often the victories relied heavily on things the book downplays or ignores, like those massive politically secured tax breaks we talked about, or the enormous financial safety net provided by his father, Fred Trump. Or sometimes it was just a matter of strategically leaving out the inconvenient parts of the story.
Like the Atlantic City Casinos, mentioned as triumphs of leverage.
Exactly. Presented as these brilliant deals, only to result in a stream of corporate bankruptcies not long after the book came out, it really reinforces this idea that the book is best understood as selective mythology, maybe propaganda rather than a verifiable history.
And this selective mythology, this whole worldview,
Yeah.
it feeds into a deeper, more philosophical critique. You mentioned something called capitalist realism. Can you unpack that concept a bit? It sounds important.
Yeah, it's a term some academics and cultural critics use. Basically, capitalist realism is the idea, or maybe the pervasive feeling, that there's simply no alternative to the current capitalist system. It's just the way things are, the only reality possible. And therefore, everything, all human experience, all values, all relationships, inevitably gets viewed through a financial or market lens.
Okay, I think I follow. And the art of the deal fits into this how.
Well, it's seen by these critics as almost the perfect instruction manual for living within capitalist realism. It essentially tells the reader that the ultimate way to find meaning, self-worth, identity is through financial success, through winning in the marketplace. That's the highest aspiration.
And if everything is a transaction, like you said,
Then people themselves risk being reduced to just their utility value. They become leverageable assets in your deals. And this constant need to evaluate, to commodify everything and everyone, critics argue that directly fuels feelings of modern anxiety and isolation. Because how can you have genuine trust or real non-transactional relationships if the underlying assumption is always about leverage and winning?
that's a powerful critique.
Mm.
It suggests the book's influence goes way beyond just business practices. It's about how maybe a whole generation started to view ambition, success, even human connection itself.
It's a deep argument. But regardless of the critiques, one thing is undeniable. The book was incredibly successful at cementing that image. The image of the aggressive, infallible, ultimate winner. And that image immediately became the launchpad for everything that followed, taking him far beyond just real estate.
Right. The book wasn't the end game, it was the catalyst. It literally turned him from, okay, a well-known developer in New York into a genuine coast-to-coast national celebrity, a brand icon recognized everywhere in America.
That fame, that carefully crafted brand recognition, that was the key that unlocked his next major chapter, television.
The Apprentice.
Exactly. The book was the ultimate setup for his move into entertainment. That national celebrity status led directly to him hosting The Apprentice. That show ran for, what, over a decade?
Yeah, it was huge for a long time.
And the show wasn't exactly subtle about its premise, was it? It was based entirely, explicitly on that aggressive winner-take-all persona that Tony Schwartz, ironically, had helped perfect on paper years earlier.
Right. The Apprentice basically took the principles from the book and turned them into weekly reality TV drama.
It provided the visual, the auditory proof, you could say, of the book's claims. It showed him in that role. The decisive, tough, unyielding CEO, sitting in that boardroom, pointing his finger.
You're fired became a national catchphrase.
It did, and that absolutely cemented his image. The boardroom became the new setting for the deal, and the persona got elevated again. He wasn't just a New York developer anymore. He was the quintessential tough boss, a household name across America.
It was brilliant branding, you have to admit. So by the time he eventually decided to run for president,
Voters felt like they already knew him intimately. They knew the character, they knew the brand, they knew the uncompromising vision of success he'd been selling, first in the book, then relentlessly on TV. That celebrity persona, built on the foundation of the art of the deal, was the absolutely essential bridge. It's what made the jump into politics even conceivable.
without the book establishing the brand and the show amplifying it, a presidential run probably wouldn't have gotten off the ground.
Highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's really unpack that political shift. Because the 2016 campaign, it wasn't just, influenced by the art of the deal. The sources we're looking at argue it was, quote, entirely built on the persona created in the book. It was the blueprint, scaled up for the biggest deal of all, the presidency.
It really was like watching the book's principles play out in real time on the campaign trail.
It was a fascinating, almost unprecedented case study, applying these aggressive private business tactics directly to a public election campaign. His speeches, that bombastic language,
The nicknames.
the nicknames, instantly creating these catchy, usually pretty aggressive nicknames for all his opponents, declaring victory constantly regardless of what the polls or the pundits were saying. These were direct applications of the book's core ideas. Use your leverage, fight back harder than you're hit, maintain momentum at all costs.
So the 2016 win, which just stunned almost everyone in the political world, it looked less like a standard political campaign and more like a giant nonstop marketing blitz.
That's a great way to describe it. It was pure brand management on a national scale. The campaign itself was total spectacle. And the candidate was everything at once. He was the product being sold, he was the chief salesman, and he was the CEO running the operation.
He seemed to intuitively understand something fundamental about modern politics. That it's become like luxury real estate or reality TV. It's about visibility, about shaping perception, maybe more than it is about detailed policy proposals.
Absolutely. And he used controversy like currency. That's straight out of the transactional playbook described in the book.
Yeah.
How does that work exactly? Because for most politicians, controversy is toxic. For him, it seemed to be fuel.
Explain that mechanism.
Okay. In the logic of the art of the deal,
Mm.
any attention is good attention. And controversy is often the cheapest, fastest way to get eyeballs to dominate the news cycle.
So by saying things other politicians wouldn't dream of saying.
By being deliberately outrageous, yeah. He ensured that his brand, his message, or at least his presence, was constantly front and center. It pushed substantive policy debates way into the background. He commanded billions, literally billions, in free media airtime this way. That's the ultimate deal-making move in politics, getting maximum exposure for minimum cost.
The sources even hint that Trump himself might not have fully expected to win, which highlights that gambling aspect again, right? Project supreme confidence, keep the momentum going, and just see if you can bend reality to fit your narrative.
Exactly. It's the ultimate high-stakes gamble. And because it worked, because the tactics were validated by the win, it meant that when he actually took office in 2017, his administration was almost destined to be defined by governing in that same style, governing through transaction, disruption, constant confrontation, mirroring the book's spirit.
He promised to bring that deal-making savvy to Washington, right? Said he could cut through the bureaucracy that career politicians were stuck in. So what were the actual results? How did governing by the book play out in practice?
Well, he definitely achieved some significant transactional victories, you have to say that. The big tax cuts passed in 2017, our sources consistently point to that as his single most significant legislative achievement.
How did that happen?
Through aggressive, very fast-paced negotiations with Congress, basically applying pressure, demanding loyalty, cutting deals. He also went after regulations in a big way. Massive rollbacks across environmental rules, financial regulations, delivering on that promise to disrupt and dismantle existing policy structures.
And that transactional mindset clearly shaped his foreign policy too, didn't it?
Oh, completely. We saw that really tough, sometimes antagonistic rhetoric aimed at longtime allies like NATO countries, questioning the value of alliances, demanding they pay more.
While at the same time.
While simultaneously pursuing these very direct, very personalized negotiations with traditional adversaries or strongman figures like Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Summit meetings, photo ops.
It seemed like a clear prioritization of the one-on-one deal, the personal leverage, over established diplomatic relationships or multilateral agreements.
Absolutely. In his view, apparently, alliances were just contracts. And like any contract, they could be renegotiated or even torn up if the current terms seemed unfavorable to the U.S. or to him personally. It was applying a purely commercial mindset to global affairs.
But this is also where the limitations, maybe the dangers, of that purely deal-oriented style started to become really stark. Because governing isn't just a series of deals, right? It requires cooperation, respecting institutions, norms that aren't purely transactional, things the book basically dismisses.
Exactly. And the sources definitely highlight the institutional pushback he encountered. Things didn't always bend to his will. For example, the first impeachment proceedings stemming from his dealings with Ukraine. That whole episode really underscored the potential danger of applying purely private business tactics, like prioritizing personal loyalty, demanding quid pro quo to the public sphere, where things like process, the rule of law, institutional integrity are supposed to be paramount.
You read accounts from inside the administration, like from Woodward or Michael Wolff, and they often describe this constant tension, right, between the myth of the all-powerful, decisive CEO from the book and the show and the messy, slow, frustrating reality of how constitutional government actually works.
That tension was palpable. The core worldview of the art of the deal, the idea that winning is all that matters, more than the rules of the game, was really put to the test in the White House environment. But the ultimate test of that whole philosophy, the ultimate challenge, came with the 2020 election loss. If the entire brand is built on being the ultimate winner, how do you possibly handle defeat?
According to the playbook, you don't.
You don't. You respond exactly in character. You follow the script that was written decades before. You refuse to concede. You insist the election was stolen. You claim massive systemic fraud, despite all evidence to the contrary. It was the absolute logical endpoint of that never admit loss, always claim victory mindset that had been sold so successfully for so long.
And that refusal, that insistence, it didn't just stay rhetorical. It escalated dramatically, culminating in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
Many historians and analysts see that moment as perhaps the most dangerous real-world consequence of the entire philosophy, a direct assault on the bedrock principle of peaceful transfer of power, arguably driven entirely by the need to protect that narrative of personal infallibility, of never losing.
What's truly remarkable, though, is what happened after that, the aftermath. The legal challenges start piling up, eventually leading to 4 criminal indictments by the summer of 2023. And yet, this didn't seem to diminish his political influence within his party, if anything.
It strengthened it, which seems completely counterintuitive, right?
Totally. How does being under multiple criminal indictments actually lead to more political power, not less? That flies in the face of traditional political gravity.
Because from the moment those legal challenges began, they were instantly framed by him and his allies as purely political attacks, as persecution by the deep state, the establishment, the swamp.
So it fed the narrative.
Perfectly. It positioned him, in the eyes of his core supporters, as the ultimate martyr, the ultimate fighter battling against a corrupt system that was out to get him because he was fighting for them. Every indictment, every court appearance just reinforced that core message from the book: always fight back. And maybe even more importantly, it fueled massive fundraising surges. The chaos itself became a form of political and financial leverage.
And even after leaving office, he certainly didn't fade away. He stayed right at the center of the Republican Party. The whole philosophy of Trumpism seemed to solidify.
Absolutely. The sources confirm his continued, almost gravitational pull on the party. Trumpism became this distinct political identity, emphasizing nationalism, populism, a deep skepticism, even hostility towards established institutions like the media, the courts, the scientific community.
And he used new tools to maintain that connection, bypassing traditional media.
Consciously, he heavily utilized alternative social media platforms, Gab, later Truth Social, to speak directly to his base, reinforcing the us versus them mentality, keeping that confrontational, transactional energy constantly simmering. No need for gatekeepers.
So when the 2024 campaign cycle started heating up and he jumped back in, it wasn't a surprise that his rhetoric sounded instantly familiar.
Not at all. It drew heavily, explicitly on all those themes from The Art of the Deal. Negotiation, leverage, fighting back, and that unwavering, almost defiant commitment to his own version of reality, his own narrative of success and grievance.
And you saw how the primary landscape shifted. Other candidates seemed to struggle unless they adopted at least some elements of his style.
It demonstrated just how successful that long-term blueprint, originating way back with the book, had become. The combative stance, the focus on brand, the ability to dominate the media cycle. Those strategies outlined in The Art of the Deal proved to be incredibly powerful, maybe the most powerful tools in contemporary American politics, at least for that wing of the political spectrum.
Okay, so let's take a step back now. We've looked at the book's creation, the mythology, the ghostwriter controversy, how it fueled his celebrity, how it became the template for his political campaigns and even his presidency. Synthesizing all of that, what's a bigger picture here? What's the long-term cultural and political legacy of this book and the worldview it represents?
Well, the sources we've examined argue pretty strongly that the legacy is nothing short of a seismic cultural shift. It fundamentally normalized a much more confrontational, personalized style of politics.
More so.
We see it everywhere now, arguably. Personal attacks, the airing of grievances, settling scores. These often seem to overshadow detailed policy debates. It represents a radical challenge to older norms of political decorum, politeness, restraint. And crucially, this style resonated, and clearly still resonates, very deeply with a large segment of the population who felt ignored, condescended to, or forgotten by what they saw as an out-of-touch, elitist political establishment.
It feels like the ultimate triumph of spectacle over substance, doesn't it? Where traditional political engagement town halls, debates about policy details often gets replaced by these big theatrical performances.
Exactly. The emphasis shifts almost entirely to performance, to personality, to branding, and that aligns perfectly with the core message of The Art of the Deal. Perception is reality. What matters is the image you project, the attention you command.
And a major consequence of that relentless focus on perception, on attacking critics, on questioning everything, has been the erosion of trust, right? Trust in institutions.
That's a huge part of the legacy discussion. By constantly encouraging skepticism or outright hostility towards traditional media, towards the judiciary, towards scientific consensus, even towards the electoral process itself, this approach fostered a climate where alternative facts could take root. where deeply held personal beliefs or group identity often seem to outweigh objective, verifiable truths. It forces everyone constantly to grapple with fundamental questions. Who do you trust? Why do you trust them? What even constitutes truth anymore?
So we've really established how The Art of the Deal, maybe more than just a book, served as this manual. A manual for constructing a specific kind of reality through sheer force of personality, through spectacle, through relentless branding. And it worked, transforming a developer into a global celebrity and then a world leader.
Yes. That reality construction project, that transactional, spectacle-driven model, it proved astonishingly durable, incredibly successful by its own metrics in both business and politics for decades. And this really brings us to the final provocative thought, the key question left for you, the listener, to really chew on.
Okay, what is it?
If this particular approach, prioritizing confrontation, prioritizing personal branding, prioritizing narrative control above all else, often above policy substance or traditional institutional norms, if this proves so overwhelmingly effective at achieving and then maintaining power at the very highest levels, will this playbook, the one laid out implicitly and explicitly in The Art of the Deal, will it become the default method? Will we see future leaders, regardless of their political party, regardless of their ideology, increasingly adopting these tactics simply because they've been shown to work so well? Is this the new normal for power?
Well, thanks for joining us today. And remember, if you want to take a look at Art of the Deal and download it or order a paperback, come on over to bookcheapskate.com and you'll be all set. And by the way, if I may toot our own horn, another great thing about the site is that every day we got a fresh set of free Kindle books, hand-picked, ready for you to download, plus a lot of other fun stuff. Every morning, it's all brand new. Cass, thanks for the chat, and we'll do it again soon.
Sounds good, Steve. Can't wait.
Until then, keep on opening new worlds with great books without opening your wallet. And whatever you do, remember this. When you read...
Our mind becomes its own kingdom.